All right, so welcome everyone to this distinguished lecture series for our ELLIS unit Stuttgart. My name is Andreas Holzinger. I'm professor for human-computer interaction and cognitive systems, and also one of the directors of our unit. And I'm very, very happy to see so many of you here. But of course, we're most happy to have Andreas Holzinger here today as our distinguished lecturer, who will talk about robustness, explainability, and also trustworthy AI. And just briefly, Andreas, before I hand over to you, a quick introduction. I'm sure people have also looked at your profile, but just as a quick summary, so you got your PhD in cognitive science from Graz University, and then the habilitation in computer science also from Graz. So you have really a double, expertise and double degree here in two very related and very interesting areas. Then you've been visiting professor in quite a few places, I noticed. So you've been to Verona, RWTH Aachen, University College London, and also University of Alberta in Canada. And I think since 2022, he's now full professor for digital transformation in smart farm and forest operations in Vienna. And just to highlight a few things, there are many roles and positions that he has, but he's member of the Academia Europaea as well as the European Academy of Science. He's of course and obviously part of ELLIS, hence also our lecturer today. And maybe also noteworthy, of course, is his role also in the advisory board for the German federal government and their AI strategy that they're currently developing. All right, so with this, Andreas, I would hand over to you. The stage is yours. We're very much looking forward to your talk. Thank you very much for being here today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your talk and also an interesting discussion afterwards.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really friendly introduction, Andreas, and for this nice invitation. So next time we meet in vivo, but due to weather conditions at the moment, we are happy to be in silico. But next time, when the Deutsche Bahn is working, then we will drink some beer together in vivo. So yeah, ELLIS is a super initiative and I'm so happy to support it. Stuttgart is a very cool place and one of the AI hotspots in Germany. So really, really very powerful, and I'm happy to support this ELLIS hotspot here with this talk in Stuttgart, Germany. Yeah, for the last 10, 15 years or so, I've been working together with my group on very generic methods to promote robustness, explainability, to foster this trustworthy AI, to provide human control over AI and to align AI with human values, ethical principles, and legal requirements. To ensure privacy, security, and safety. And this is what is called human-centered AI. So my name is Andreas Holzinger, and in the next, let's say, 45 to 60 minutes, I will make a little tour towards what we have done. But first of all, I think the outline of the talk. So what is human-centered AI? Then some challenges. Human in the loop is a very important cornerstone. Explainable AI as a first step. I give you some examples, and then causability. And causability is not a typo. This is intentional. So causability is not causality. I will explain what causability is. It measures the quality of explanations. And then at the end, I show you what we have recently done with counterfactuals to enhance trust. So trust is our leading guideline through this talk. Yeah, of course, thanks to my founding organization, some of my projects, I gratefully acknowledge the support of these founders. And yeah, first thing first, what is human-centered AI? You know all this. Industry, we're very familiar with these industrial revolutions, and you know, and I point on that, Industry 4.0, approximately 13 years ago, wanted to replace humans with AI and robots most of all. And you know, I'm internationally recognized for this human in the loop concept. And I was overjoyed that Industry 5.0 is now exactly what we have promoted 13 years ago with human-centered AI. So Industry 5.0 is a concept now that refers to this including human robot, human AI collaboration, cognitive systems customization. This is very great, and I'm so happy to do this because this was really not a trend in 2010 or earlier. There was really the goal to exclude the human, to automate everything, to press the button, wait for the results, and exclude the human out of the loop. So this is very, very good that we have now this new trend towards integrating of human into our systems. Yeah, and this digital transformation, so digital transformation is a very good example for the power of simplicity. Ones and zeros now are dominating our world. This was not always so. So when you look back to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he developed the modern binary number system, and published in 1703 his arithmetic binaire, the explanation of binary arithmetic. And then all this. George Boole introduced the Boolean algebra and so on, and then the rest we know well, Alan Turing, and then John von Neumann. And what is really amusing and what is astonishing is that such simple principles has made it so prominent that everybody knows now about this digital transformation. And it is a simple principle, von Neumann machine. And now this digital transformation is permeating and going into all fields of our daily life. And this is really very, very interesting. But please acknowledge that digital transformation is not just to switch on computers and make it digital. It is much more. It is a whole transformation chain to transform business processes, and includes a lot of things, not only AI, but a lot of other things as well. Yeah, and when you, when you look at this digital transformation and this enormous triumph of these digital computers, they were made possible by three fundamental concepts. And I teach this from the early stage to my students. And it is really very, very fundamental. And exactly these three concepts make AI so powerful, but I think there is a danger in the future in these three concepts. So first of all, scalability, so scalable. Our brains, for example, are not scalable. Even if we wish that, even if we try it, we cannot scale our brains. And if we are dead, then our knowledge is gone. At least if you have a textbook or whatever written. But digital computers are scalable, practically without limits. And most of all, they do not die in the sense, so they live forever. So once you have this digital information online, you can say this is not lost. And this links up to the second triumph, to this communication. So while we humans now rely on the limited voice channel, you see how awkward it is to communicate via this voice channel where we have very low bandwidth. So digital computers can exchange data in parallel, high-dimensional, and super fast. So this is also if you think that billions of these servers can communicate with each other, so this is really very, very astonishing. And connectivity, this is maybe one of the really breakthrough technologies in computer science, this connectivity. So please imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that your little mobile phones are connected to every other device on our planet, to every little sensor, so to every valve in a nuclear power plant. So that's kind of scary as well. So connectivity is one of the biggest advantages, but I think also a big danger in this digital world. So you see, these three principles have made digital transformation so powerful today. Connectivity is networks, so engineers say networks, mathematicians say graphs to it. And you see graphs, networks, graphs, network science. This is an interdisciplinary field which deals with the structure, dynamic, and the function of such networks in various dimensions. And the fundamental principle is this digitalization, this digitalization. And this is very interesting that this science is now so prominent and so powerful, and everybody knows about that. And of course, AI is in the news, even for other reasons. So, for example, for this bias, for example, or for crashes in cars, and for example, can you trust them? Risk rise as robotic surgery goes mainstream, and so on. So all these things bring us to now to a central question, and this is the question of, can we trust the results? But before we continue, we should define a few terms. And I think the first is trust itself. So really important is that we acknowledge that trust is subjective. This is a purely human aspect. It's a belief, you can say, an assessment which goes towards security, dependability, integrity, predictability, reliability. It is always an expectation. So I expect that I can trust Andreas Bulling, for example. Yeah? So this is my expectation, and this is subjective, and this is trust. This makes trust. And when we now want to build trustworthy systems in digital systems, so we call this trustworthy AI, we have to ensure that we do not misuse this expectation, so that we ensure security, safety, privacy, what we have seen before in this news article, this non-discrimination, fairness, we call it fairness, accountability. Accountability is a very good term, which is retraceability and replicability. And finally, this environmental well-being. And this brings me to robustness and explainability. And now we have to define what is robustness. Robustness is a technical term, of course, comes from engineering. And this is basically to produce reliable results, even if we have perturbed input data. And so this is a very, very important term. And explainability is also a technical term invented by engineers. Explainability technically highlights decision-relevant parts in machine representation and machine models. I will show you later some examples, but this highlights just parts which contributed to the model accuracy in both the training or in the result of a specific prediction. But very important is that this explainability is a technical term. It does not refer to a human model. And therefore, we have invented causability, and causability, not the typo, causability as it is from causality and usability. Causability, an artificial word. It is the measurable extent to which an explanation of a statement to a user achieves a specified level of causal understanding. And this is very, very important. Understanding. And this is purely human. This is very good, very powerful, this human understanding. And we can measure this with effectiveness, with efficiency, satisfaction, but always in a specified context of use. And this causability, of course, refers to a human model. And we have built a framework for that. And in a recent work, we have identified 3 frontier topics. All start with networks and their inference. So you see a big aspects in all fields is this complex networks and their inference. This is in biology, in smart farming, in smart forestry, but also, for example, in human health, for example, or in many other parts. You have networks, and nearly they are everywhere. And then we have these graph causal models and these counterfactuals. I will show you some examples of counterfactuals. So actually, I would regard that these graph causal models and these counterfactuals are a kind of a workhorse for verification and explainability, which is then the final frontier to ensure this trust and that you can make trustworthy decisions. So trustworthiness, robustness, explainability, you see this belongs all together. And this is very important. Yeah, and of course, it's not as easy as it might be, because if it would be easy, it would not need to do research, so we would be retired. But you know, Andreas, we are not allowed to retire, so we have to move on. And of course, we do not say problems, we say challenges to it. But there are some really fundamental and obvious things, and I teach this to my students since I started 2003, and what it's interesting that from the very beginning I preached that it is easy to learn from big data, from large amounts of data, but it is very difficult to learn from little data. And interestingly, we rarely have this really big data. So people are then always a little bit disappointed if I say, yeah, show the data to me. Yeah, where are these big data? Yeah, we have little data. Yeah. So in real problems, you have rarely big data. Yeah. So learning from little data is a big challenge, and then to extract knowledge, relevant knowledge. And this keeps me sleepless. What is really relevant? So this is a really hard question, the discrimination between what is relevant, what is non-relevant, what is irrelevant. And then, of course, the holy grail of science whatsoever is to generalize, to find these underlying principles. And this is not easy because, as we all know, we have always to fight the curse of dimensionality. And then I think it is very important to disentangle the independent explanatory factors of the data. That means, and I have mentioned already this word today before, this is this understanding, this causal understanding of the data in the context of an application domain. And this is very important. And I had class yesterday, and I really said to the students, first of all, know your data. Yeah, you have to understand your data. And they were very disappointed when I say 95% of artificial intelligence is data science. Yeah, it is. And for a reason, because you have really to make something out of it. Yeah, and I'm now super happy. I'm super happy. In a very recent talk, Jan LeCun confirms all this. So this is really great. I'm so happy. And the trend is now towards exactly these things. And this is really very great. It shows that we are on the right path. And when I always thought about this human in the loop, the first question from the engineers were, why do we need the human in the loop? What should the human in the loop do? We want to exclude the human. Press the button, wait for the results. Why do we need the human? I was bombarded with these questions forever from this, what should the human in the loop do? And while the success of this data-driven statistical learning, as we all know, is impressive, yet a human in the loop can, and I have to emphasize, sometimes, not always, contribute with something which we call experience and conceptual knowledge. And this is very impressive if you look up the work of Hans Reichenbach. I recommend to read this book. This is really very good, where he explains his common cause principle. And this is really a guiding principle in our whole life. No correlation without causality. And the challenge is here to infer these causal relationships from this purely observational data. And Hans Reichenbach described this, and he combined this causality from Judea Pearl with probability from Pierre-Simon de Laplace. And this is really very good. So correlation does not tell anything about causality. And a good example, a well-known example, is this paper by Matthews. So this paper shows that there is a highly statistically significant correlation between stork population and human birth rates across Europe. And now, even though it is evident that storks do not give birth to babies, this shows that an unreflective interpretation of correlations and p-values can lead to very questionable statements, because we as humans know, of course, that storks do not deliver babies, but does the machine know this? Yeah. And you see, this is a strong focus on correlation in traditional statistics, and this led to the so-called frequentists, person and Bayesians, and the war between person frequentists and Bayesians, and only Judea Pearl made this causality popular again, so for the last 20 years or so. So this is very interesting. So yeah, the question remains now, what can we do and what can the human in the loop do? So we have encountered some challenges, and remember the minimization of error functions. So even, unfortunately, even the best algorithms, you know, we have always one problem. We have this generalization error. The generalization error remains, but we have also seen that people can often contribute with very good experimental knowledge. And here you see that we can bring in a human in the loop for human inspection. And the human experience is very valuable in certain domains and can bring in conceptual knowledge. This is exactly what we are lacking in machines, this conceptual understanding of an expert, for example. Yeah, think of a forester, for example, with 30 years of expert. You cannot learn that from scratch with any algorithm to date on this planet. So data-driven AI benefits from this big data, of course. Yeah. However, as I have mentioned, sometimes we don't have this big data and we lack the ground truth. I will come back to the ground truth later on. But again, very important just to emphasize what is the human supposed to do, because I really I have it in my ears always the question what the human in the loop should do. Humans are awesome. Humans are fantastic because they use abstract concepts. This is very good. So even little children, and I show this always to my students because they see it then, that little children can clearly discriminate between a cat and a dog. And you don't have to show them millions of images to teach them. So they know, of course, sometimes, not always, what is relevant. They can bring in Hausverstand, in English, common sense. And they can set the prior. This was long the Knackpunkt of Bayesian inference, to set the prior. And this was the killer argument of Pearson when he killed the Bayesians, because he said, you cannot set the prior from scratch. But we will come to this later on. Okay, how do the humans generalize from very few examples? Because humans are considered as robust and they can generalize even from very few examples. And of course, I emphasize again, not always, but people are most of the time able to understand the context, and based on their experience, they can draw conclusions from small data, from little data, from noisy, from incomplete data sets. Just think about your kids. They are very great in very many aspects, and they can make relevant decisions, and that is very, very awesome. Yeah, and what they can, for example, they can find these common underlying explanatory factors, and I think this is really very important for our next decade, to exactly to bring in this underlying explanatory factors in the machine learning data. So, explainability. Yeah, what are interpretable models versus interpreting models? So when we talk about explainable AI, you know, the explainable AI community is working to distinguish between so-called anti-hoc and post-hoc model. So what is an anti-hoc model? These are interpretable model. And when you think of the talk of Cynthia Rudin. She says, use interpretable models, anti-hoc models. Yeah, great. I love it. I love it. I love regression. I love naive Bayes. I love decision trees. I love graphs. This is all great because we use them for certain tasks. But sometimes, of course, you have to use deep learning models or whatever. And then you have this kind of black box model, which is called the post-hoc model, and they are hard to interpret. Yeah? They are difficult to interpret, therefore they are called like these black box models. But why are they hard to interpret? Because they are, per se, the models are so big, so the models are so complex, and this makes it necessary now to have other models. This is the red here. To have other models to make it explainable. So while these anti-hoc models are explainable per se, so anti-hoc therefore, these post-hoc models are not per se explainable, and you need a second method to make it explainable. It's like a combustion engine. Yeah? A Verbrennungskraftmaschine needs an electromotor to start the engine. So it's a similar approach. Yeah? Nicht selbst anlaufende Maschine. Okay, so what are typical examples of such post-hoc methods? There are millions now available, so to exaggerate, but there are a lot. But you can start with simple methods. So for example, you can start function-based, for example, with gradients, for example, a multivariable generalization of the derivative. Then you can do sensitivity analysis. So this is perturbations. You perturb a model and look how robust the system responds. Of course, it's difficult because you measure mostly local effects, but often we want to look at the global effects, which is also not so easy. Then you can make decomposition. For example, simple Taylor expansions are already a decomposition approach. Brooke Taylor invented this in Edmonton in UK. This is the old Edmonton, the old original Edmonton in the UK. And then from this you can, for example, use elaborated methods, for example, breaking down parts into smaller, more understandable parts and highlight then the features which contribute to the results. There are many methods available. Very good methods are relevance propagation, and I will show this because they are so widely used now. But there are, of course, many other methods. I am unable to show now all methods, but just that you have an idea. So we have written a paper about that methods of explainable AI, where we tried to compare them, and where we also have a little bit of a timeline that you see this is a vibrating area. So this is really a young field, and the community has developed a very great number of different methods, and this is really very, very important that you try out which methods is for your purpose the best. So you cannot provide some generalized recommendations. Yeah, one method is very good, and this is based on explanatory or explanation by decomposition. And the core idea here is to compute a relevance score. This is this R, this capital R index T of X. And you do this for each input X in the dimension D, as you can see here. For example, you have this here. And the goal is to find out how much each pixel here contributes to the classification result. Here, the traditional cat-no-cat classification. And you do this layer by layer, hence the name relevance, layer-wise relevance propagation. And then you can highlight this. For example, you can highlight which parts of the network contributed most to the classification result. So you can answer the question of what makes a cat a cat. And you can do this for very good results. So this is very interesting, and this method is widely used, maybe the classic methods. This is developed by our colleagues at the TU Berlin, Klaus Robert Müller and his team. Yeah, and this works also for graphs, and I have mentioned graphs are so awesome. Graphs, networks And in the medical field, for example, but also in biology, for example, in smart farming, you have a lot of graphs, and a lot of data is represented as graph-based data, as point cloud data, and then as graph data. For example, proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of life. And from such proteins, which are openly accessible in a wide variation from databases, for example, the PDB database, experts can then infer secondary structures from these, for example, derive a sequence graph, and you can see that this also works on graphs. So this is really very awesome. So this is an extension of layer-wise graph, layer-wise relevance propagation. Very nice method, very, very nice. Yeah, some examples from our own work. Actionable AI. So in many domains, in practical domains, both the layman and the experts have to divide entities always into two binary classes. You know, yes, no, healthy, diseased, or malignant or benign, and so on. But this is, for many entities, not simple. And you know, from fuzzy logic, there is another class called maybe. Yeah. However, what is here important is also to include a corresponding quantifiable tendency. This is an inclination towards one of these two opposites, and this can be sometimes very helpful. And as you know, classification by fuzzy logic has proved successful for a long time. However, the problem here is when using these if-then rules, then the human must be able to associate the input attributes with the output labels and to create a consistent rule base. And we have done this in our work here. And here the proposed learning process partitions atomic attributes into decomposite attributes through a quantified aggregation. And we have called this classification by ordinal sums of conjunctive and disjunctive functions for explainable AI. And this brings us to what is actionable explainable AI, because what we have proposed here is a new dissimilarity function. And this is a flexible classification for three classes. So, and this is a good example when a human in the loop is powerful, because the human expert might have sometimes, not always of course, but sometimes might have the clue and can help the algorithm to find this solution. And this we call actionable explainable AI. Yeah, I have mentioned graphs. I love graphs, and part of graphs are decision trees. And for example, here also you can beautifully include a human in the loop. So here we have a decision forest from a network comprising the multi-model node feature vectors. And here's the network displayed at the top, and you derive decision forest at the bottom. So each node of this network comprises m node features. So you see this in the graphs, and feature vectors of length n. And then each random walk through this creates a set of feature vectors used for building the decision trees. And here, this is also a novel approach for selecting network modules from multi-model feature spaces. And our approach can be applied to different applications where you have multi-model numerical feature values. So we have applied this in the medical domain for disease module detection in protein networks. And as I have mentioned before, proteins are the building blocks of life. So this is applicable in many problems in the life sciences. You know, proteins are nearly everywhere. And this is also a very good contribution to actionable explainable AI, because this greedy decision forest is easy for the expert in the loop to interpret. So these are interpretable, anti hoc interpretable, as I have mentioned before. So this is very important to mention that all these decision paths are retraceable, and therefore the expert can understand and they can interpret the results and can also follow contributions of features from different modalities. And this supports not only a more informed decision making, but also can lead to new inventions of the experts, of, for example, of the biologists, can get new insight into previously unknown facts or things or issues or whatever. Yeah, this is just an example of such a disease module. So you see this, for example, here, this is this HN, this is a very, very well-known cancer type. So this is this heterogeneous nucleoprotein H1, the famous H1. And this is a protein encoded in genes in humans, and this is involved in pre-mRNA splicing and has a role in the regulation of alternative splicing. And this protein is part of a heterogeneous nuclear-ribonucleon protein complex, and this plays a critical role in the processing of pre-mRNA into mature mRNA. And this is a key step in gene expression. So you see, these are interactions. All these genes interact here with specific sequences in this mRNA and influence the splice site selection. And the function is essential for regulation in diverse biological processes and may have implications in various diseases. So an expert biologist or a medical scientist can have insight into this and can then find out, for example, new connections between these. So this helps cancer research. Yeah, also this in this work, we present here a novel graph-based deep learning framework for disease subnet detection. This is also from the medical domain. We are very much, we were heavily inspired by these explainable graph neural networks. And here what we see is the classification of patients into a cancer-specific type here and a random cancer group. And each patient here is represented by the topology of a protein-protein interaction network. You can see this here. So these are the PPI networks here. And we enrich these nodes by multi-omics features from gene expression again and this DNA methylation. These are the colored circles here. You see this here in this picture. And the topology of each graph is then the same for all patients, but the values of the node features vary. So this reflects the cancer-specific molecular patterns of each patient. So with this explainable gene N, the biologist or the medical specialist can also get insight into disease subnetwork detection and this helps, of course, for cancer research. So, of course, very important. Yeah. And we have done this decentralized, so in a large European project where we work on federated learning. So we made this federated. So this is federated and helps then in different scenarios where you do not want to have everything calculated in one central scenario. In the medical domain, you often have sensitive data where the data should not leave the origin. So what did we do? We've divided the knowledge graph into relevant subnetworks, hence the name subnetworks. And the pressing question, of course, here is what is relevant. The machine does not know what is relevant, but human domain experts do. Cancer experts are very clever. They are awesome. And here you see this is a good combination where XI together with the human in the loop can help. The problem is still this non-i.i.d. data, and the assumption is that clients that are closer have similar data. So this is the assumption. Yeah. So federated example, so the values of the nodes here and the edges are different for each patient. You can see this here. first relevant subgraph, second relevant subgraph, third relevant subgraph. But the structure of the graph is always the same, and now we can classify with this GNN and compute a set of relevant subgraphs with GNN subnet, only the topology, and we can transfer then the concrete values of the nodes and edges and receive, therefore, a new data set for each discovered relevant subgraph, and then you can train a separate GNN for each client. And this is also interesting because we found out here a so-called majority vote, and this might be a solution to the disagreement problem where we are working at the moment. This federated follows a decentralized strategy, but here we can have sometimes a disagreement problem, and I will come back to this later on. Maybe first the overall pipeline. Here you see the overall pipeline. So the biologist, the expert can select the data, for example, via user interface, can then explore the graph, can modify the graph, can retrain and predict. Here, very important counterfactuals, and I will explain counterfactuals later on in our final work, in most recent work, and these counterfactuals are awesome, you will see. And then, of course, you can, or the expert can download a modified graph data set and can have new insights into these things. So this is highly relevant for biologists and medical specialists, cancer research again. Yeah, of course, what is open, general, the disagreement problem. So the disagreement problem in explainable AI refers to a very weird situation where different explanation methods provide completely conflicting interpretations, divergent explanations for one and the same decision or predictions made by these AI models. And this issue is particularly important for future research in trustworthy AI, and we are talking about trust for several reasons. Trustworthy AI requires that users can understand and most of all rely on the decisions made by the AI system. Disagreements in explanations can exactly erode this trust, as users may be unsure which interpretation should we believe, model A, B, C, or whatever. And this disagreement among these explanations can obscure the true reasoning of the AI itself, and this complicates the effort to hold these AI systems accountable. You can remember this was at the very beginning of my talk, accountable, retraceable, replicable, and so on. Okay, but I think I'm coming rather to the end of the talk. So I have already the sign of Andreas pulling. So 15 minutes left or so. I think this is correct. Yeah. So let us now continue with causability. So causability measures the quality of explanations obtained from the explainable AI methods. I show you what humans do and what humans can do. We have observed how human pathologists make diagnoses. This is really very, very interesting and had given me a lot of insight how human experts proceed. So usually they describe what they see and use special terms. For example, here, the cells, they talk about objects, they talk about cells, architecture. For example, here they say this is a portal field. They point then and say the cells are smaller, are closer together. So the first step is rather descriptive. And in the second step, then they interpret their observations using their implicit knowledge. For example, here, the cells are smaller and closer together. This might be a tumor, but it could also be an inflammation. So we need contextual understanding here, and we need some more information to make a solid diagnosis. And here it is important that different modalities contribute to an outcome. So above all, it is becoming more and more important in medicine to consider these different modalities. So not only this image, but also, for example, the physiological parameters, the patient history, omics data, multi-omics, and so on. But one problem arises when I asked the pathologist, how do you know that this is a cancerous cell? Then he shrugged with his shoulders and said, yeah, this is in the textbook. Yeah, so it is in the textbook. Yeah, so you see, the problem here is this ground truth. So where's the ground truth? The missing ground truth was then the motivation that we developed an experimental environment. But I think first of all, we should define what is ground truth. So ground truth, the name comes from aerial photography, from mapping. And I like the word mapping. So think of an airplane taking an aerial picture of Stuttgart, for example. That's the basis for a map. But the map is an abstract representation of the reality. The reality down on Earth is called ground truth. This is the real houses, the streets in Stuttgart, the university in Stuttgart. So mapping, I like mapping because this is actually a good word, and I will come back to this mapping later on. So ground truth, most of all, is information obtained by direct observation. And then we have this empirical inference, so drawing conclusions from this empirical data. And then this causal inference, drawing conclusion about the causal connection based on the conditions of the occurrence of an effect. And then this is one of the holy grails, not far away from Stuttgart, is Tübingen, and Bernhard Schölkopf is working on this causal machine learning. And this is very important because this has also to do with bias avoidance and algorithmic fairness for decision making. And now I come back to what we were inspired from this work with pathologists. So we developed an experimental exploration environment, and we named it after Wassily Kandinsky. Why? Because I was intrigued. I love art, and I was intrigued by this art of Wassily Kandinsky because he analyzed geometrical elements that make up every painting. For example, the point, the circle, the line. He analyzed them not objectively from the point of view of physics, but from the point of view of the inner effect on the viewer, so from psychology. And he described that there are some basic elements, basic shapes from which more complex compositions can be built. And I should now note that he did this at a time when the compositionality of our visual sense had not yet been developed. So this was not yet empirical research. This was in 1923 when he pointed up that the world is compositional, so built out of other objects. And much later, in 1962, Hubel and Wiesel conducted their famous experiments that later inspired the deep learning folks around Rumelhart, Hinton, Williams, Lecan, Bengio, and all our heroes. But the experimental evidence for this work is exactly this compositionality. And this inspired us for the development of our Kandinsky patterns. And we have all available for the audience, so also in form of printed booklets, because we wanted to observe also humans, not only machines. It's kind of an IQ test. And for example, yeah, this might be funny, but this is a very important background. So in our Kandinsky experimentation environment, we can create concepts, but together with the ground truth. For example, here a true statements. Here you see the cells are smaller and closer together, can be a tumor. But we can also produce a completely false statement, here a random pattern, or a counterfactual statement. What if the cells are slightly larger? Then it is inclined towards an inflammation. So you see, with these counterfactuals, you can do a lot. So this is very, very interesting and important, and you can experiment with this Kandinsky pattern set. Yeah, there's of course a lot of previous work for this. So the oldest I discovered was in my book by Douglas Hofstadter. You know, this is this favorite reading. So when you were a teenager, so this book had 800 pages. So it leaves the impression that you are very important if you walk along with this very thick book and you read it at the breakfast table or at the beach or wherever. Yeah, and on page 69, I think this is on page 649. I don't know it now by heart, but I hope so. So I should write down the page number here. So I discovered these Bongard problems, and they go back to Mikhail Moiseyevich Bongard. He died in 1971. And these Bongard problems are kind of geometric puzzles. But what is interesting is that they do not carry concepts. So what is more related is clever. So this is very close, but still different from our Kandinsky patterns, because our concepts address groups of objects, and the clever concepts, for example, they do not. For example, they do not have this left off, right off. So they refer to a pair of objects in a scheme that might be discovered, but one does not compare group of schemes. So I think this is for moving objects and for and therefore they have also developed this cleverer. So this is with this collision video. So this plays a major role for autonomous vehicles. And I think this comes from these autonomous vehicles. So this is trajectories of, for example, moving objects, but this has not a high priority in medicine. So different. And Bongard logos, another work is this. This was presented at NeurIPS 2020. So small objects that are convex to each other in one group, and in the other group, and they are non-convex ones. So this is similar in principle Kandinsky patterns, but the question is that relevant, for example, for histopathological diagnosis? It could be important, and we can make a distinction between convex and non-convex sets as well. Yeah, another related work is Curie. So this is a recent work around Brandon Lake from Facebook research, and Curie short for compositional reasoning under uncertainty. Also a very nice work. Yeah, all of this is, of course, freely available to the international research community. So our Kandinsky patterns, in conclusion, are mathematically describable, simple, self-contained, and thus controllable test data sets for developing, validating, training, explainability in AI. And whilst our Kandinsky patterns have these computationally controllable properties, they are also easily distinguishable by human observers. So this is very important for human-computer interaction researchers. And yeah, all of our information can be found in our GitHub repo. Yeah, towards the end of the talk, how can we measure the quality of explanations? For example, with highlighting. So highlighting, the first step, you have a method of explainable AI, for example, layer-wise relevance propagation, and you highlight technically relevant parts of machine representations, or these machine models. So what part contributed to the model accuracy or to a particular prediction, but it does not refer to the human model. What is now important is this causability. So this requires also new human AI interfaces, to our opinion, that enable this contextual understanding and allow the domain expert also to ask questions and counterfactual. What if the cells are bigger, for example? What if the cells are denser? Yeah. And because the human in the loop can bring in sometimes, of course, not always, this conceptual knowledge and understanding of the expert. Yeah, and this is the model. When is an explanation good? Obviously, when it has been fully understood by the recipient. But that is not easy, as we all know. And you might remember Paul Watzlawick. Paul Watzlawick, an Austrian communication scientist born in Villach, Austria, and he worked then at the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, California. And you know his 5 axioms. You can't communicate, you can't not communicate, relationship, content, aspect, cause, effect, and so on. So let's start with the statement. You have a statement. For example, here, a statement S is made either by a human, S index H, or a machine, S index M. And where S is a function of R, K, and C, and we define R is an representation of an unknown or unobserved fact, U index E. This is this one, the unknown. And of course, with due respect to an entity, yeah. And K is the pre-existing, this is the a priori knowledge in the sense of Pierre-Simon de Laplace and in the sense of later on Judea Pearl. And that is quasi embedded in an algorithm for a machine. Think on the LRP method, which I have shown before, or for a human. So this is the explicit tacit knowledge. This is the human in the loop. And C is the context. C is the context, the knowledge context. For a machine, this is a technical runtime environment, and for the human, this is the physical contextual environment, the context in which the decision is made. We call this the pragmatic dimension. And now we have this U index E, the unknown or unobserved facts, and this represents now the ground truth GT, ground truth, and which we want to model M index M with the machine or M index H with humans. And the overall goal now is to determine whether and to what extent we can make it congruent with the ground truth. So these dotted lines are then the congruency. And I show you an example that you can have a better idea. Yeah, and when is the explanation good? Of course, when the explanation can be understood by the user. Yeah, and this is the example. So here on the left, you see a benign non-tumorous area in the middle. This is the greenish area, and the malignant tumorous areas above and below. And the detected positive cells are marked by the AI with red dots. So if a pathologist, the human in the loop, evaluates this, she or he will intuitively see with one look that the explanation of the AI solution is correct and sufficient. We say, in this case, there's congruence between machine and human. So this is fulfilled. However, if we look at this example below here, the same visualization method is applied, but now the AI solution found wrong tumor areas in the middle here. And in this case, we have incongruence between machine and humans. And this is important because we can highlight this with our methods. And why is this important? Because otherwise, this would not be visible for the human, and the AI would make a definitive error. So this is really very, very critical. And this can be applied for the detection of bug beetles in the forest or for rootworms in the cornfield in smart agriculture. So this is very versatile and generic. Okay, finally, counterfactuals. Our most recent work, trust via counterfactual explanation. So I'm coming to the conclusion. This is the last example for today. Trust can be achieved through counterfactual explanation. So in this way, people can make him or herself familiar with unknown processes by understanding the hypothetical input conditions under which the outcome changes. I've seen you as an example before. So what we argued here is that the generation of these counterfactual explanations requires several aspects of these generated counterfactual instances, not only the counterfactual ability. So this is a multi-objective optimization problem that makes it difficult because we have the problem of balancing 3 goals. The first is plausibility. The second is the intensity of change, and the third one is the counterfactual power. And we did this, so we see here the counterfactual representation. We built a framework. And here you see this framework. This framework is capable of producing counterfactual instances for an audited model, target T of dot. So dot can be anything, based on 3 criteria exactly. This plausibility, this adversarial power, and the change in density. So X in this case is the input example to the edited model. C of dot is the attribute classifier here. So this is the classifier that predicts the attribute vector of its input query. And D of dot, this is the discriminator model of a gun, for example. Yeah. So I will skip the closer description due of running out of time. So I will just point to the paper so you can read the paper. This is already available. So this is the mathematical background to it. So this is the overall loss function that drives the learning algorithm of the generator and the discriminator. And this is defined as a linear combination of reconstruction and Wasserstein gun losses. And I skip this now for time. This is the algorithm. So here we see the process of generating counterfactuals for target model T of dot. And this comprised then both the training phase of the Jan architecture and the meta-heuristic search for the counterfactuals. And we have done 6 experiments in total, and this is just one sample result. So here you see a unfinished digit generated by the supplementing of the MNIST dataset as an additional class. And these digits are designed to cover the gap found in the initial phase of a previous experiment. So I will point to the paper. Conclusion. So to ensure trust, we need both robustness and explainability. And to ensure this understanding, we must ensure that it can be understood by the target person. So a why question must be in some framework. And this is a huge difference if I explain something to a 5-year-old child, a young medical student, or a senior pathologist, or a visitor from outer space. So somehow this must adapt to the previous knowledge and enable that it can be understood. This is difficult, of course, but what we need is a multimodal causability enabling this why and this what if questions. And controllable AI, can we still control AI? Think on the 3 things. So scalability, communication, connectivity. Detecting when an AI system deviates too much from target behavior. Is this still possible? I don't know. Is it possible to recalibrate or shut down even the system? Is this still possible? Can we shut down network systems whatsoever? So with these concluding words, I want to say merci beaucoup. My new university is called beaucoup, and it is a brilliant French word, merci beaucoup. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm open for questions.
All right, thank you very much for this super interesting talk. And I already see some hands up, so that's perfect. I was just about to say now the floor is open for questions and discussion. I saw a hand, now it's gone again. No. Lei, do you want to go first?
Yes. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. I have a question about the generative model with counterfactuals. So basically, counterfactuals are ask what if I do something else, and what that is not in the dataset, let's say, but the causality it has the attributes that possess the invariant mechanism underlying this system. So essentially, if you generate counterfactuals, there will be like shifted distributions in the generative model. So how do you like deal with this distribution shift problem in the GAN?
Yeah, you mean adapting to the needs of the end user?
Yeah, adapt to the end user.
Yeah, this is of course only to do able in the context of the problem, of course. So you have to know the problem, and then you have to know the problem space, and then you can, for example, check out what counterfactuals make sense. So this is I think what you have asked for.
Okay, so it's basically depends on the very specific domain information, which domain you're working on, and then
yes,
you have
of
to come
course,
up with this. Okay.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my
If
question.
I understood your question correctly.
Yeah.
Great. Other questions from the audience? So otherwise, I have one, so that people can think a bit more about follow-up questions. I have one because at the very beginning, when you talked about causability, you also mentioned this user model, and this seems to be a distinctive difference to, I think, causality, right? This was the argument.
The difference between causality and causability, you mean?
Causability, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, you didn't talk more about this user model, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on when you say user model, what you have in mind there. And because I have a suspicion it might be different from what I, understand with user model, or when we talk about user modeling, what this may include. So I'm very curious to know what you understand.
Yeah, user model, this is a main part of human-computer interaction research, of course. Yeah. And and mostly when you think of the explanations given, only if you think for a certain method, then it is just, for example, highlighting via heat map some things. Yeah. But the problem is that is it really suited to the people who are looking at this? Yeah. So for example, this was my very last statement, that this is a complete difference if you explain something, show something, explain something to a 5-year-old child, or to an expert, or to a medical student. So there's a big difference between a medical student and, for example, an expert pathologist, because there's a huge difference. Yeah. And knowing this is very important. And I think this is one of the big open issues in user interfaces. Also, these adaptive user interfaces, I think these are very important. This in future, we would need these human AI interfaces, maybe, which are looking at for example, if somebody has understood it. And you can do a lot with sensors, for example, and you can, for example, from this facial expression, you can read a lot if somebody has understood something or not. And if the systems recognizes that the end user has not understood the explanation, then it must change the explanation and adapt to the knowledge, to the previous knowledge. I give my students always the example, if they explain something and there is somebody from outer space, so you have to ensure that they use the same physics as we are. Yeah. So example, if somebody lands here from a far out planet in a different solar systems, can we ensure that he will understand what we are talking about if they use a different systems of physics, for example? Yeah. So first you have to make sure that the counterpart, so whom you give the explanation, has the ability to understand this. Yeah. And I think this is really very important in the future, to make use of this adaptive possibilities, and to take into account that there is a huge variety of people on our planet, and you cannot provide an explanation who fits to everybody. Yeah, it's impossible. Impossible. Yeah. But therefore, I think this interactive is very important. So we have learned with our biologists and with our medical people that they like, for example, to interact with the system so that they can, for example, ask also for these counterfactuals, and they get insight into new, completely previously unknown things. This is the aha effect, yeah, with the people. And I think this is the chance to play around, and then you see this as a tool where you can really discover new knowledge and new insights, not only to just to give explanations or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you use any of these user models already in your
No,
work? Like,
no. This is one of our unfinished things. So yeah. So
okay.
I think you are much more elaborated on this and much better on this, because we did not do this so far. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It could be interesting to to talk about this at some point, because indeed I think the pieces are there already. There's lots of work on user modeling side. As you've shown, there's lots of work on the the explainable and trustworthy AI side, and bringing these two together. If this is something that has not been done yet, then I think this could be really interesting to join forces here and
Yeah,
try
absolutely
to combine
agree.
them.
I agree. This is the most important aspect, but this we are lacking. So the essential part is this last mile, this really a cool interface, because you cannot expect that they directly operate with the code, that they use Python and they use all this stuff for what we can do. So you have to make it simple, but to make it simple is difficult. This is really difficult. Yeah.
And do you reckon, do you have an idea of like how complex this user model has to be, or ideally would be? So I mean, would it be like a full digital twin, so to say, modeling every aspect, or do you think there are some key, let's say,
You
properties or
are
aspects which you cover?
walking in a good direction, digital twin, but digital twin opens endless avenues, because alone digital twin is not defined clearly. So what is a digital twin? For example, if I sample some point cloud data, is it already a digital twin? I can make a graph out of it. I can apply graph neural networks out of it. But what we really would need is that we have then a user interface component where the non-expert user, the domain expert, can deal with it. So I think this is one of the most important aspects in the future, because we are, and I am not an exception, we are concentrating far too much on the back end, and on the cool algorithms and stuff, But we stop then when we go to the end user, because the end user needs some really cool stuff on a tablet or on a mobile or whatever, so that he can or she can really interact on this with the touch-based interface and do some cool stuff. We have tried to do some. So for example, one of our work, which I have shown, has a crude interface, but this was done with Shiny, with R-Shiny. So this is also very, but you see, we are lacking stuff, on this, So, and rarely you find people who are interested in cool user interface development, because please do not mix up designer with developer. This is a big difference. I do not need designer. I can match my colors by myself. But what we need is developers. So people who can really build a cool interface and show it to an expert end user and make this and bring this to life. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Other questions from the audience? I see a few people already left, probably had to go for dinner or so. Are there any other questions? There's still a bit of time.
Yeah, maybe one question from my side. When you were giving a lot of examples from the medical area, and medical area is in some way very special, as you are lacking real information. So if we would go for a technical system, or even in the medical area, you might have some other information coming from a blood test or whatever, to which giving you additional information. How would you use this this kind of additional information and integrate it into the visual inspection of some cell pictures or so?
Yeah. I agree that the medical area is a special area. It is a difficult area, but you can get a lot of insight working with medical experts, because I think this is a very, let's say, complicated field. Yeah. You mean some generalization strategies, how to bring it into other domains? Was this the question?
Yes, and how would be how you automatically can integrate other information which coming from different sources?
Okay. You mean this multimodal fusion? Yeah, this is possible. Yeah, for example, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, so there are clinical workplaces which can do that. For example, bringing up on the screen, for example, the histopathological image, and then at the same time the physiological parameters, or for example the patient record at hand. So of course this is possible. Yeah, this works. Yeah, this works. And for example, the pathologist is then, for example, directly basing his decision on various modalities, different aspects, and often they consult other experts. So this is not a one-shot decision. But I have to admit that the pathologist is in a rather better situation, because this is not in an emergency case, so they have a little bit of time. Of course, not endless time, because cancer patient cannot wait endless, but it's not immediate action. For example, I worked with emergency doctors, and there is much harder because you have the time constraint. Yeah. And then when you have the time constraint and you have to make decisions within 5 minutes, this makes it really hard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I thought I saw a second hand before, but
Yeah.
great.
So you've mentioned before that that there's this trust issue where if you have multiple explanations which disagree with one another, that this erodes the trust in the system.
Yeah.
But it's not as though human experts always agree with one another in explanations. So has there been measurements on how much basically this similarity or disagreement with human experts occurs compared to like these machine learned models?
This is on our agenda for future work, because we stumbled in one of our projects, we stumbled upon this disagreement problem, because we did some experience and then we found out that there are huge, let's say, disagreements available. And I fully agree that also we observe that human experts disagree a lot. And therefore, I think this is one very good application of federated learning, because federated learning, I think the primary concern is that you have this kind of privacy idea, but I think this can also be used, and there we are working currently on it, so that we can use it for a joint solution of the disagreement problem, so that you have the majority vote of some experts, for example, making decisions. So, but for example, this would be a nice study to compare the effects from machines and to contrast it with humans. So I would be highly interested on that. Yeah. Give me some PhD students. I have enough financing and we can do that. Yeah, not joking. I have a lot of open positions and we cannot find people who are interested in this, or we cannot find anybody. Yeah? I don't know what's happening in Europe, but we are lacking experts or lacking people who want to work on the university. You know, the university, we cannot offer you the high salaries of industry, of course, and we cannot offer you only working 10 hours a week for a work-life balance increasing. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? doesn't seem to be the case. In this case, also given the time that has progressed quite a bit, I would actually suggest that we close the session for today. Andreas, there was one question in the chat before, if you would be willing to share your slides.
Yeah, of course, I can send the slides to you, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually suggesting people to get in touch with you because you might also want to have the contact anyway. It might be interesting.
I can send you the slides and you can put it online at your ELLIS hub for everybody. So it's really not a problem. Yeah,
that's fine for you.
I would be happy if we start a collaboration. So you have seen now what we are doing actually. So yeah, and we work on generic problems, so they are applicable in many domains, but also, for example, in the smart forest, in the smart agriculture area, there would be an immediate need for good user interfaces. And I know that you are very good on these user models and user interfaces, so this would be a really very good cooperation on this. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Then definitely let's stay in touch. And then we can definitely see if we can, link the two.
Next time when we drink a beer in beautiful Stuttgart.
Maybe in spring when it's a bit warmer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in this case, as I said, I would suggest we close the session for today. Andreas, thank you very much again for a very interesting talk. Thanks everyone for coming and for the lively discussion and all the questions. Yeah, and have a good evening, everyone. And yeah, hopefully see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.